Now, Greater Manchester Police are investigating footage of an armed police officer kicking and stamping on a man's head. The video of the incident at Manchester Airport has been shared widely on social media. It shows a uniformed officer holding a taser over a man lying on the floor and striking him twice as his colleagues shout at onlookers to stay back. I'm joined now by the former Met Police Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chaudhuri. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
You've seen this video. What's your reaction to it?
Well, I've actually watched it twice, and I have to say it's absolutely shocking and quite horrific to watch. And I appreciate that we're looking at a clip of an incident, but it's a really disturbing incident in my personal view.
The force says firearms officers were subjected to a violent assault. Is there any instance which justifies the use of force we can see in this video?
Look, if you look at the video immediately, there does not appear to be any justification for that assault that young man who was laid motionless on the ground was subjected to. Greater Manchester Police have said that their officers were violently assaulted prior to this, just before the incident took place. And that being the case, then those individuals that were responsible should be held to account for that. Equally, the officers present, all of them, each and every single one of them, need to justify exactly why they did what they did. The statement that Greater Manchester Police have put out actually is quite misleading, because what it implies is that those officers were justified in the action that they took because they were at risk of having their firearms taken from them. And if that is the case, and that they were at risk of having their firearms taken from them, they need to justify at which point that they were at risk, because when you look at the footage, that certainly doesn't appear to be the case. You have two gentlemen there, one laying face down on the floor, and then you had another one in the background sitting on a chair with his hands behind his head, being very compliant. That same officer who stamped on the head of that male laying face down then went to approach the other guy and took him to the ground and also stamped and kicked him. So he needs to justify why he took the action that he took, and at which point was he at risk of having his firearms taken from him. There was a number of officers that were also surrounding that whole incident who didn't seem to take the same course of action, who there was lots of commotion going on. So let's see what they say. And I think actually Greater Manchester Police have said that they will investigate this themselves. Totally and utterly unacceptable. This needs to go independently to the Office of Police Conduct.
Yeah, I mean, Shabnam, you have already alluded to this, but there is a sense, and I have no doubt that people listening to this will, for some, this will be the first thought in their mind, that what we're seeing is a fairly short video clip of what's happening, and that doesn't show any of the context, the situation that came before it or what came after. How helpful is it when these sorts of videos go viral?
I think we have to be realistic about this particular video. Look at the video, put it into some form of human context and ask yourself the question. And the police officer needs to also ask themselves the same question. Was I justified in the action that I took? Was I at risk of having my firearm removed from me? Were there other people around me at risk of being seriously assaulted by those individuals that were laying face down on the floor? What was the actions of those individuals just before they laid down on the floor that caused the particular officer, to take the course of action that he did? I understand why the public are really, really concerned about this. You're at the Greater Manchester Airport, and I'm not sure if it's an international one or not, but you've got thousands of members of the public coming from all over the world that walk into that airport that will expect to be treated with some form of dignity and respect by the police and by anybody that works in those environments. And the only other thing I'd say is any emergency officer or worker that is subjected to any form of violence, those individuals that are responsible should be brought to justice for it. But that does not mean to say, and I'm not saying that's the case in this one, but that does not mean to say that you see red mist and that you brutally violate somebody else's right and take the law into your own hands. These are the questions those officers will need to answer.
Well, Greater Manchester Police has said the footage is being reviewed by its professional standards branch. Does that go far enough?
Absolutely not. No, I'm sorry. I think that you've got to look at the public interest in this particular matter, and you've got to look at the public concern, trust and confidence, which is rock bottom across policing across the UK. To mark your own homework in an incident like this is not acceptable. Those officers need to be held to account, quite rightly, and those who subjected those officers also to violence also need to be held to account. This needs to be independently investigated by the IOPC.
A female police officer, we understand, has suffered a broken nose in this altercation. Greater Manchester Police says that all three of the officers involved were taken to hospital for treatment. It is a particularly stressful job, and I'd imagine, Shabnam, that working in airports a particularly stressful environment. Is that stress any sort of, I mean, not an excuse for what we've seen in this video, but perhaps an explanation in part?
Police officers work hard every day, many of them, thousands of them, and they take risks every day of their lives. And those officers who have been assaulted, I hope that they all recover fully. There is no justification for seeing red mist or for taking a course of action which results in the injury of a member of the public who's been subjected to an arrest. I'm not saying again that this has happened, but potentially, if you think that my colleagues have been injured and therefore that justifies me to take a certain course of action, you're in the wrong job. These are officers that carry firearms. These are elite, specially trained officers who deal with these type of incidents day in, day out.
I was going to ask if it's all the more significant that we're seeing firearms officers here.
Well, I think it's quite normal to have firearms officers at airports. Now, whether they were local officers that were called into the airport, I don't know, or whether it was those officers at the airport that were called to the incident. I just read something on social media about somebody spoken to members of the family. The young man that was laid on the floor has sustained injuries, which doesn't come with any surprise. Sorry, there was some form of abuse targeted towards the older lady that was there, either the mother or the aunt or relative. So that obviously all needs to be investigated. But I think it's quite normal to have firearms. I see them all the time at any airport I've ever been to. Firearms officers patrolling those particular airports.
I wondered more so that we are seeing firearms officers in this case clearly losing control, and you'd hope that the sort of officer that would get to the level that they are able to hold a firearm would not, as you put it, see red mist. Can I just ask for your thoughts on something I'm seeing being shared on social media, and that is of the man having his head stamped on and being kicked by a police officer in this video being of Pakistani descent. Is that significant? Is that worth talking about?
I think it's definitely worth talking about. I think the general public will see that as something that's been worth talked about. I think, unfortunately, people from Black, minority, Asian communities are definitely treated differently by police officers. Again, I'm not saying that's the case in this incident, but I can totally understand why the members of the public would feel that this has been a targeted attack on an individual for whatever reason, and race will definitely play a part in that.
Shabnam Chaudhuri, really good speaking to you, former Met Police Detective Superintendent, reflecting on that shocking footage that is being shared widely on social media, with Greater Manchester Police investigating the footage of an armed police officer kicking and stamping on a man's head.